In this video, we will review some concepts and vocabulary related to square roots. In Part A, the question is, what is the definition of the square root of a number n? The square root of a number n is a number that, when squared, is equal to n. In Part B, we need to identify all the square roots of 16. Now, remembering that a square root of 16 is a number that when squared is equal to 16, we will probably immediately think of 4. But we need to also think about another possibility. When we multiply a negative number times a negative number, we obtain a positive result. So the square roots of 16 are both 4 and negative 4, because 4 squared equals 16, and negative 4, quantity squared, also equals 16. All positive real numbers have two square roots, a positive square root and a negative square root. So this brings us to Part C. What is the difference between the statements identify the square roots of 16 and simplify what we would normally read as the square root of 16? So one difference is the statement identify the square roots of 16 is a reference to any square root of 16, whether it's positive or negative. In contrast, when we write that square root symbol with a 16 underneath it, we're not asking for all the square roots of 16. That symbol is actually called the principal square root. And when we are asking for this symbolic answer, we are explicitly only asking for the positive square root. So the principal square root of 16 is only asking for the positive square root. The problem is when people read that symbol out loud, they read it as the square root, and so they blur the lines between what the square roots of 16 actually are and what that symbol is actually referencing, only the positive one. And this brings us to the vocabulary that we need to review in Part D. In Part D, we need to define the following and give an example or two if possible. The first vocabulary is the radical sign. The radical sign is what people typically call the square root symbol. In future math classes, we will use this same symbol, but we will not be referencing square roots. That's something we don't need to worry about right now, but it is good to recognize the general name for this is the radical sign. The radicand is the thing that is underneath the radical sign. So when I write down the principal square root of 16, 16 is the radicand. If I write the principal square root of 25, 25 is the radicand. So the radicand is the object underneath the radical sign. A perfect square is a number like 1, 4, 16, 25, 36, and so on. Perfect squares are numbers whose square roots are also integers. 1 is a perfect square because 1 squared is 1. 4 is a perfect square because 2 squared is 4. I skipped over 9 there, but 9 is also a perfect square because 3 squared is 9. So when we refer to perfect squares, we'll be referring to these numbers 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, and so on down the road. The principal square root is the formal way to say the positive square root. When we symbolically write down a radical sign with a 16 underneath, we are referencing that we are dealing with the principal square root and only the positive square root. Same thing with the principal square root of 36. With a 36 under a radical sign, that radical sign is a reference to the principal square root. So again, we need to distinguish between using that sign and when we're talking about all the possible square roots. And finally, a radical expression is any expression that involves a radical sign and a radicand. So the principal square root of 36, the negative principal square root of 49, those are all radical expressions.